Let's say you were drawing what has now become a virtuous cycle of the Chinese development cycle. So you said high savings rate, very high investment as a percentage of GDP. Today, it's a very high consumer. So there are secondary effects of being a manufacturing stroke investment-oriented economy. And then today, there is a very high per capita consumption rate. It's a very nice virtuous cycle, driven as an outsider, feels like led by manufacturing. Let's say you now have the hindsight of all these years, and you were drawing this virtuous cycle. What would you say were the key tipping points or the key decisions that the Chinese government made that enabled this virtuousness to actually happen?
First of all, I think there are many challenges in the Chinese development model and in the Chinese economy. And I think China or Beijing, the government, never really had a plan. When Deng Xiaoping first started, he famously said two things. One is to cross the river by probing the stones under your feet. He didn't know where the path is. So you're just probing the stone under your feet when you cross the river. That's one thing he said, that whatever works. The other is, it doesn't matter if a cat is black and white, as long as it catches mice, right? So that was his plan. And he didn't have a plan. It was just one step at a time. It worked out because China was moving in the market economy with invisible hand, it simply worked. But the picture in China is not all rosy. Yes, China has invested a great deal, and China's investment has driven its economic growth, and thanks to its high savings rate. But that model is not sustainable. China's savings rate, well, this growth model has created a big problem, that is overcapacity. China is having a great overcapacity in all manufacturing sectors, all industrial sectors. Today, China's, in 2008, in the depths of the global economic recession, Americans' capacity utilization rate dropped to 78%. Today, China's capacity utilization rate is about 75%, even lower than America in the economic crisis. That's how much overcapacity there is. Today, India produces 120 million tons of steel, and China produces more steel than the rest of the world combined. It has capacity 1 billion metric tons of steel. China produces more cement than the rest of the world combined. In fact, China produces, in 3 years, the amount of cement that America did in 100 years until 1990, right? So China is building a huge amount of overcapacity, which depresses the prices of finished products, which is responsible for basically deflationary pressure throughout the world. And export sector is not where we invest, because the profit margin is squeezed thinner and thinner every year. Currency is appreciating, and the labor cost has been appreciating at about double-digit level every year. In past 10 years, 11% per year. But the price of finished products has been falling every year, so profit margin is squeezed lower and lower. But more importantly, this model is not sustainable. The savings rate is not sustainable. China is able to save so much because of my generation. If this generation retires, China's population will age precipitously, like no other country has ever experienced. Because my generation, on average, everybody has 3 siblings. My next generation, 1 child, because of the birth control policy. So when this generation retires, all of a sudden, Chinese population will age, and the savings rate will be gone. It will drop to maybe 30%, eventually to 25%, very similar to India. Yes, very similar to India. And that's the reason why I refuse to retire. I have to hold on to it. So China is shifting its growth model away from investments in private consumption. And in this regard, I think in India, private consumption accounts for probably close to 60% of GDP. And 5 years ago, the number for China was only 35%. Today it's about 39%. But China is definitely moving in this direction. It has a long way to go. Last year, for the first time, the retail goods markets in China has exceeded that of the United States. But 10 years ago, American retail sales was $4 trillion. China was $1.8 trillion in 2009. And last year, China was $6 trillion. America was also $6 trillion, but slightly smaller than China. So China is definitely moving in this particular direction. But when China shifts the growth model away from investments to private consumption, growth rate necessarily will drop because investment has multiplier effect, whereas private consumption doesn't. So you would expect the Chinese growth to hover around 5-6% in the foreseeable future, and will never go back to the double-digit growth rate about 10 years ago.